Negative space is the name given to that space around your subject that lacks any texture or any color changes. It can give a sense of loneliness or isolation, and sometimes a voyeuristic feel to your photographs. It is a form of minimalism and simplification of your scene, because basically you're getting rid of anything that you don't want in that frame. Now, the name makes it sound like it's a bad thing, but it's not negative as in the opposite of positive, but more of an aversion for your viewer's eyes. So the person looking at your frame subconsciously won't want to look at that part of the frame because they're drawn to the subject. But from that, you might be thinking, well, what's the point of negative space in the first place? Well, like I said in the intro, it's a way of creating loneliness or isolation in your photographs. Or if you produce photographs for magazines, a place for the editor to put lots of text. The main thing that negative space can do is simplify your image. Because of that lack of complexity, it makes it easier to absorb. I don't know about you, but when I look at that last image, it's as if my body just goes, it's that sigh of relief, because I know exactly what that image is and I can take it all in. I suppose it's a little bit like going into a quiet room after being in a really loud, busy city. In landscape photography, it's quite tricky to get this right, but there is one place where you can use negative space to your advantage, and that's at the beach, especially when you use ND filters to get long exposures. If you are interested in getting this in your photography, take a shot of the scene in front of you, have a look back at it and see what you can exclude from that shot. If you overexpose the sky, will it add or detract from the shot? Or if you do a long exposure, are there textures you can get rid of? Or if you use a zoom lens, can you cut out all of the distractions and find that negative space? This is the really tricky thing about this when you've got a complex scene in front of you. But it is doable, and you can sometimes find that negative space to really emphasize the subject in your frame. People often make the mistake of thinking a textured area is negative space, but I see it as something that lacks texture and is one solid color, so it's not distracting from that subject whatsoever. Your mind just doesn't want to look at that place in the photograph. Look at this image. Even though the boat is the subject and it's small in the frame, the surface of the sea has texture in it, which gives it more weight. Therefore, I don't see this as negative space. Now, in this photo, the boat is closer to being surrounded by negative space, but there is still some changes in that color and a slight bit of texture in there. However, if it looked like this would then isolate the boat, and to me, this would be a true form of negative space. To take it to an extreme, you could even do this, and this would really show the isolation of the boat in a vast and lonely sea. Then if you take all of the color out, this makes it even more dramatic. Look at this next shot of a skyscraper. With the clouds giving the sky a bit of texture, it gives your eyes something to look at and something to digest. However, if I remove that, my eye isn't interested in that area whatsoever and just wants to explore the building. And this shows the power of negative space in directing your viewer's attention. Now, if we go back to the bird's eye photograph of the boat, by having the subject surrounded by negative space, it's easier for you as a viewer to be directed towards the subject as there's nothing else to look at. Now, when you get into photography, there are many stages that you'll go through on your photographic journey. And one of these stages can be really summed up by Robert Capa's quote. He once said, if your photos aren't good enough, you're not close enough. And there's a lot of truth to this. This is great as it gets you to fill the frame with your subject, which you might not be doing. But if this is all you do, your photos can become boring and samey quite quickly. And this is where negative space comes in. If you have found a subject to photograph, once you've got those photographs of it where it fills the frame, start putting it in different positions in the frame and start looking for solid colors around that subject where you might be able to create negative space. Using inclement weather is a great way to utilize this. On foggy days, I'll often get a lot of that emptiness in the shot, giving a lot of negative space in that frame, which kind of goes against Robert Capa's idea in that quote. Another version of negative space is a silhouette. Even though there is no detail in the black parts of this frame, you know what it is. This is negative space, but used in a very different way. It's saying a lot with nothing. In this frame, there's not much detail at all, but I imagine a mountain range covered in trees with the sun setting behind it. When you're first starting out with this technique, using dark colours is a great way to get negative space into your photographs. If there's a backlit scene and it has an interesting outline, try making it into a silhouette by underexposing the shot. On the other hand, if you have a boring sky, try overexposing it a little bit, getting rid of any texture in that part of the photograph. If that surrounds your subject, that again will be negative space. Long exposures can also give you negative space. If you've got a rough sea, that will hold a lot of texture. But if you shoot a long enough exposure, this will get rid of any sense of movement in that sea. If you look at this shot, I'd say the sky is bordering on being true negative space, as I've overexposed it enough to lose most of the detail, whereas the sea in the foreground still has some texture and color changes. This makes it slightly interesting, so it's not quite negative space. So the next time you're out and the conditions look boring or there's not much going on, try and incorporate negative space into your photographs. It's quite a challenging technique, but once you get it, you can create some very unique photographs. Next week, I'll be talking about balance in your photography, and this is the one thing that starts to bring it all together. If it's out already, I'll link it here. I'll see you next time.